Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Magna Pro Presents Turn and Burn!
Welcome back, everybody, to a special episode of 4.5 Marks with a special interview with none other than the voice of Magnum,
Pete Sanctions.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you coming on. Like, honestly, I feel like this has been a long time coming for us, too. We've talked about it in passing, but finally to make it happen is just all super, super incredible. So we just want to say thank you on behalf of all the Marks. Thank you for coming through. I wanted to pick your brain just to start the episode, so I have a fun little, I guess, exercise, if you want to call it that. But I have a list of 9 wrestlers, okay? I want you to pick 4, eliminate 5.
Okay.
And I'll repeat them as many times as you need me to.
Sure.
Starting off, we have The Rock, Stone Cold, Hulk Hogan, Bret Hart, Ultimate Warrior, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, Roddy Piper, and Macho Man. If you want, I can give you that too. They're all right there. Okay. So you have to pick 4, eliminate 5.
I would pick The Rock, Stone Cold, Undertaker, and Shawn Michaels.
Eliminate the rest.
Eliminate the rest.
Wow. That's a good list, I'll just be honest. I was trying to figure out, like, kind of how to gauge you where your style of wrestling, I guess where your favorite time period was, or era, the best way to put it. So that makes a ton of sense. Super cool. So thank you for that. Yeah. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit too. I guess when were you introduced to wrestling? Like, what would be your earliest memory of, like, you know what, I love wrestling. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. I'm originally from Allentown, Pennsylvania. I have a lot of family on the East Coast. And we frequently traveled to Brooklyn to see my grandmother at that time. And I want to say it was early 1993. We went to her house in Brooklyn. And I had vaguely seen, like, the set of playing cards in the store. And I remember I was walking along in a park somewhere and stepped on a Hacksaw Jim Duggan trading card. Like,
Cool.
I saw references to wrestling creeping in, but had never really seen it, wasn't really a fan. And for some reason, I caught the tail end of the march to WrestleMania 9. And that was like the first partial event I ever saw. The first actual TV show I ever saw as far as wrestling was All American Wrestling in June of 1993, where they recapped the 3-match series between Mr. Perfect and Doink the Clown for the 1993 King of the Ring qualifier. And I don't know if it was how it was presented or how good the commentary was, and I couldn't tell you how I knew this, but I subconsciously knew who was who and what was what. And at that time I was like, this is pretty cool, and like I gravitated towards it. And I don't know if just kids with cerebral palsy are attracted to bright colors, and I gravitated towards Doink because of the ring gear, but...
I like Doink, too.
Yeah, and, like, after that point, I was hooked. I couldn't tell you how or what about that particular episode got me hooked on it, but... and I remember, like, the 1993 or 1994 King of the Ring report with the vignettes and all that. But I slowly but surely became a huge fan. And I was mostly exposed to WWF. I didn't see much WCW. I wasn't in the territory that got NWA. I remember me and a childhood friend, he tried to convince me that if we messed with our old box TV, we could pick up ECW in a region of the country that didn't get ECW whatsoever. So it was mostly WWF at that time in the early to mid-90s that I was attracted to.
So not to date myself, right? But you've been watching wrestling or introduced to wrestling before I was even born.
Yeah.
I was born in 96, so I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I'm not shocked. So, yeah.
I mean, it's still cool. We bounce around back and forth because I feel like that period of wrestling, at least the 90s in general, was probably some of the best wrestling we've seen in history. Mm-hmm. I just, based on who was available or who was at the top and then the matches that they had, I mean, there's not a lot of things that can match up to the 90s, I feel like, in modern time. I mean, wrestling is always evolving, and I'm sure you've seen it evolve just in the metro area, but in general, wrestling is constantly evolving, so it's super cool to see the directions that each wrestler goes.
Definitely.
Let's see here. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit more about comedy. Just out of context, I guess. I went to my first comedy show Thursday, matter of fact, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've never been introduced to anything like that, and I've heard you say in either other stand-ups. I've watched a couple things from you, so I have a little bit of an idea. But you say that commentary or ring announcing has a lot to do with comedy. Like there's a lot of things that go hand in hand in that. So I guess I wanted to pick your brain a little bit too about your comedy, and I guess how to get over stage fright. Like there's all kinds of stuff that's involved there. So I'm really curious to see how wrestling and comedy go hand in hand for you.
For me, it was just by circumstance in July of 2013. My friend and I were going to go to an Aesop Rock concert at the Waiting Room,
Wow.
which ended up selling out. And we looked in the Reader at that time, and it said, Comedy Open Mic, Barley Street Tavern, free. And I was like, well, we have a backup plan. Let's go see what this is all about. And I'd seen Comedy Central, vaguely, Comedy Central Presents, and was a fan of stand-up for a long time, but I had no idea we had a local scene, and had no idea there were places you could actually go try it. After seeing that first open mic with a lot of the local comedians that were around at that time, I decided to give it a try that month, and slowly but surely consistently performed from that point on. And my experience in wrestling served me well in stand-up, because I had always been up in front of a crowd with a microphone in my hand for, at that point, 10 years, and was very comfortable in that environment. It took some of the nerves away, not all of them, because the old saying goes is the day you're not nervous before you walk through a curtain is the day you never have to walk through it again.
Whoa.
And
Wow.
that allowed me to be more comfortable up in front of people. And as I first started out, joke-wise, it was rough. I talked mostly about my disability and jobs that I've had, and it resonated with people, and slowly but surely I incorporated wrestling into it. And I also discovered that if you're up in front of a crowd not really comprised of wrestling fans, but you do material that is just like what these wrestlers call themselves, what the shows are called, the fun stories like going up and down the road, you might potentially gain a few fans just by resonating that material out there. And you can introduce people to different facets of your life, and a lot of other comedians in the area are involved in all kinds of different stuff. And if they do jokes about different passions in their lives, almost unknowingly they can gravitate more people towards that, and those passions can gain a lot of fandom through that.
Definitely. I find it super interesting, honestly, because I've watched a few, like I said, and I mean, you're super funny. Yeah. Like your jokes hit so good, and I'm like, man, I would love to go to a show. So if there's anything recent or upcoming soon, please let the Marks know. We would love to support, because honestly, it's really good.
and the two compare in the way that comedy is obviously less taxing on your body, but a lot cheaper than therapy. And just like I was saying, I could be involved in so many other different things and tell jokes about it in front of people that aren't really fans or had never really heard of it. Or I can gauge the response by asking the crowd if there are any wrestling fans, and if I get kind of a little bit of a pop there, I'll know, okay, these are the people that are going to be on my side for these bits, and introduce that to them that way.
So I guess in a wrestling sense, or even a comedy sense, there's a lot more psychology involved than I guess a normal person would understand.
Oh yeah. The act of going up in front of strangers and saying something to make them laugh is difficult. And we've had drunken hecklers get on the list at the open mic, go up, realize how hard it is, and they're instantly humbled. It's like an Iron Sheik moment, in real time. And a lot of the different parallels, you watch The Wrestler, and then you read a book by comedian Sam Talent called Running the Light, and comedy and wrestling, you realize, aren't that much different. You're going up and down the road, underpaid, you don't know how the system works, you're performing in front of maybe 10 to 15 people for maybe enough money to eat that night and go on to the next one. Then you realize, that's a lot like indie wrestling, and it's gratifying to hear the local comedians use wrestling terms. Like use the worker handshake when they come up and introduce themselves. Like use the term crowd pop or use the term indie comedy to describe local stand-up comedy. And, you know, any kind of entertainment venture, you're going to have stuff like that. And I'm very fortunate to be involved in both and introduce different fandoms to both things. I just wish I got more of my comedy friends to come to wrestling and more of my wrestling friends to come to comedy.
I agree. I think we should start a campaign for that. I think it'd be really cool because honestly, I'm a full believer. I'd really enjoy that.
Sure.
So you said that you started comedy 11 years ago. I mean, compared to then versus now, like I'm sure it's a completely different change for you, right? I feel like the confidence level is there. I mean, I don't know how long it would take to develop something like that, but I mean, I know it's not instant, right? So just from then to now, like how far do you think that you've improved? I'm sure it's been a huge distance, right?
My style has changed a lot on stage in terms of the jokes that I try to diversify my set with and all the different things that I talk about. And also, you know, not to put on a tinfoil hat, but you kind of have to ride the wave of societal changes as far as what is acceptable and what's not, what's trendy and what's not,
Relevancy.
what's topical and what's not, you know, things like that. So I've had to adjust my style based on those things, but I feel like I've grown a lot as a performer. And I think whether it's in wrestling or comedy, I was always meant to perform. Whether it was the class clown in elementary school or like kind of being the center of attention, I feel like I was meant to perform. Like, not necessarily in any one aspect, but, you know, you feel like you're made for it. And you feel like you fit it very well. And the local comedy scene has definitely grown in terms of the different venues that do open mics, the different comedians that have joined the scene, and also the opportunities that different comedians get all over the Midwest, you know, not just Omaha, Des Moines, and places like that. And I also have always wanted to get into voice acting because in almost 21 years of wrestling and 11 years of stand-up, it's not lost on me that my voice could make me money someday. I just don't want to get sucked into the subscription services that be like, we can get you this many leads if you pay us $24.99 a month and go through a talent agency. And voice acting stuff in the Midwest, especially here, is few and far between compared to if I was living in LA, Chicago, New York, one of the other major population centers. But it's always something I've wanted to pursue. And during the pandemic, I got involved with an app called Hit Record that was started by actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And you could pretty much do it from your phone, and it's any kind of prompts like writing, voice acting, photography, poetry.
Wow.
And that kept me busy. So that's something I've always wanted to branch out to.
That's so cool. I mean, it makes sense. Me and the Icon were actually talking earlier that listening to... So we go to every show, right? I'll just preface that. We go to every show, so we don't get to hear the commentary. But when we watch back the episodes, I mean, you have a striking resemblance to Joey Styles. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but your voice, like, I just need you to scream, "Oh my God," one time so I can reference that in my head.
Yeah.
But you have a striking similarity to Joey Styles, and I really appreciate that about you.
And I've also been compared to Gordon Soley. And it's kind of, you know, like, one thing about me, I'm uncomfortable with fame and exaltation. Like, I appreciate people being like, oh, you know, it's great to talk to you, like, you're such an inspiration. And I'm like, thanks, I appreciate it. But when you have all these eyes on you and the mass acceptance starts to sort of make its way into your social life or whatever, and, like, that's why I don't engage with many fans on social media. Like, I just like to do my thing, do it well, do it to the best of my ability, and have fun doing it. That's another reason why I don't know if I could live the life of a full-time contracted performer. Like, I've always wanted to do extra work for the WWE because I have had many friends do it maybe since around the time the Rosebuds came around.
Wow.
And heard about how much fun it was, and I've been trying, and I keep trying every year, once or twice a year it seems like, and commentary is still a very new experience for me, because the Proving Ground and the Patreon tapings that Magnum did, that was like spur of the moment. The world's postponed. You know, we got to figure something out, and I was kind of thrust into it. But I want to say it's maybe 6 or 7 months now that I've been doing commentary, and I'm very comfortable with it. And I had a fan come up to me at the last Magnum show, and they told me how much they miss me, and they told me how much I add to the show or whatever. And my student, Alex Conkin, who I've never had a student or understudy before, so that's also a new experience.
Cool.
I immediately put him over, and I'm like, the kid's doing fine. He's learning a lot. He's doing great. And she was very insistent. She was like, oh, but we miss you. You have a je ne sais quoi, which is French for I don't know what. And she was drunk, but that has no bearing on it. And I appreciated that. But sometimes business is business. There's business changes. Like, there have been times in Magnum where someone else has ring announced for whatever reason, and I've just kind of been teaching them along or doing commentary or timekeeping. As long as I'm out there and on there, I'm fine. And as long as I'm involved with it, that's great. And Strife always told me, I'm always going to have you doing something. You'll always have a spot here doing something, even if it's not necessarily ring announcing. And, just to be a part of the show in whatever way I can is my goal, ultimately.
I mean, we feel it for sure.
Yep.
We do. Again, we're still relatively new to this. I mean, 2 years is still 2 years, but compared to the history of Magnum, I mean, we're babies still, if that makes sense.
Right.
I guess one thing I wanted to touch on too is I think we as marks need more education into cerebral palsy. If that's something that maybe you can help us understand and let the viewers know. Again, I've never had anybody personally affected by it, so I have no idea. So if you could share a little bit about it, maybe,
Sure.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I'm an open book when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Cool.
Because, as cliche as it sounds, I'm one of the lucky ones. I was supposed to be born in September and was born in June.
Wow.
And very little was known about cerebral palsy at the time. The nurses in the hospital in Allentown where I was born thought I had a seizure, and I actually had a level 3 bleed in my brain. And because of the premature birth and even growing up, I really didn't have a good grasp on the disorder. But it starts in the brain, it affects the muscles, it affects learning comprehension, it's neurologically based. The specific severity that I have is called spastic diplegia, and if you have heard of a Midwest independent wrestler called Gregory Iron, he has cerebral palsy as well. He has spastic hemiplegia, which mostly affects the use of one of his arms. And stand-up comedian from Denver, Josh Blue, has a differing severity of the disorder as well. There are those with very severe cases who require round-the-clock care. They're wheelchair-bound. It's a rough road for them in terms of quality of life and stuff like that. So anytime there's any kind of a charity or philanthropic effort for people with disabilities and volunteer opportunities, I always try to jump on that. And unbeknownst to me growing up, my mom actually became an occupational therapist with the Mundermeyer Institute in town, and recently retired maybe a year or two ago after doing it for close to 20 years.
Wow.
And she worked with kids with disabilities and visited them in school during activities, and drew up performance evaluations and really tried to give back to that segment of the population, and I was the inspiration for that. And some days are better than others in terms of the associated anxiety that can come with that, and pain levels and stuff like that, but I get by. And if I can turn the negative into a positive and use it as inspiration for others, no matter what vehicle I choose to do it from, then it's definitely a big positive, and it's definitely a big part of my life that I don't mind sharing with other people.
Wonderful. We appreciate that immensely. Again, I tried to put together some notes on this and trying to understand, but I'm super glad you shared that with us, because now I feel like we know better, and then also the viewers would know too. It's a condition, and we just want to know,
And it definitely affected my training, because I trained in the Magnum Pro Dojo from 2012 to 2013, about a year and a half, in the Magnum Pro Dojo, aka Strife's Garage, in environments ranging from triple digits with mosquitoes to below zero where our backs would smoke every time we took a bump.
Wow.
And that's another thing too. The motion of bumping and the motion of doing all the different moves and all the different motions of wrestling training was difficult for me because my mom, when I asked what cerebral palsy was or asked for an explanation, her explanation was the most metal I've ever heard, and I use it for everybody else that tries to ask for a summary of it. Her summary was, your brain doesn't know what your body's doing in general space. Like, if you put your shoes on the wrong feet, you instantly know my shoes are on the wrong feet. If I put my shoes on the wrong feet, it takes me a little bit for it to register upstairs that something's off and I need to make a change. And it was just like that with the bumping and the chain wrestling. And Strife used to tell me, you bump so incorrectly, I can't even imitate it. And he also said, around the time I had to withdraw due to a back injury, he was like, I was going to tell you to stop coming after 2 weeks, but you hung on for a year and a half, and he told me he was proud of me. Which anybody who knew Strife or Nate, or however you knew him, a compliment from him didn't come easy, but there was no better feeling in the world when he gave you one, just like there was no worse feeling in the world when he left us. And that was very gratifying for me to graduate in, I think that was the first class of the dojo, and to see how the training has evolved from the dojo to the wrestle shop to Bulletproof Academy is another good part of Magnum as well.
That's so cool. I guess we'll just segue straight into that. I did find some photos online. I just wanted to pick your brain. We'll blow them up for the for the viewers and stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've seen them online too. But I saw this. This looks like a tag team match with you and Strife versus Joey Anderson and then another guy. I wasn't sure who was in the photo. They didn't specify.
That was Magnum Pro Unsanctioned, June 2013 in the Eagles Club, back in the Eagles Club days.
I know. I've always heard about the Eagles Club.
Oh.
I used to go there a lot when I was a kid,
Yep.
but I never knew there was wrestling there, which blows my mind.
Right, and ironically enough, Logan messaged me yesterday asking me to go on Cage Match and give them all of our old results and things like that, just to get our stats up to date and
Super cool.
get a lot of the old footage out there. But it was maybe a 6-month-long storyline where Team Lariat just relentlessly bullied me. Every time I would introduce them in a monotone style, and they were none too happy about that. Sean threatened to chokeslam me, and then they splashed water all over my suit. Is really trying to tap into the bullying aspect and how that's one facet of wrestling storylines that everybody resonates with, because bullying is almost like world hunger. It's never going to be solved. You're never going to have a panacea to stop bullying, especially when it involves people with disabilities. And it all came to a head when they shaved my head. I needed a haircut anyway, so I didn't mind that too much.
Win-win.
Yeah, and it came to a head in that tag match. It was me and Strife against Team Lariat, which was comprised of Joey Anderson and a guy named Sean Nautilus, who was an independent wrestler from the Iowa area who made frequent trips to and from Magnum, and they were that incarnation of Team Lariat at that time. They also included Marcus Holiday, because they kind of came from a little promotion in Milo, Iowa called Adrenaline Pro Wrestling. It was kind of a sister promotion to Magnum.
Cool.
We'd go back and forth there all the time. That was when I learned to ref, which I don't do so much anymore because I was more comfortable as a ring announcer, and I was a better ring announcer than I was a ref, even though that really gave me an insight into the small town aspect, because Milo, Iowa has a population of less than 1,000.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure every time we went up there, that was their entertainment for the month. There was no 4-H, there was no, local fair or anything like that, and they came out in droves and they loved it. I had never signed so many autographs for kids in any promotion I'd ever worked for up until that point. But that particular match, it was the culmination of that big storyline, Me and Strife had matching gear.
I saw
and, it was along the lines of what I was talking about, a Strife compliment. Like, two things about Strife. If you could have a good match with him or make a positive contribution to Magnum, you were going to go places. And the mark of a good trainer is they don't shove you out there in front of people unless they know that you're ready. And he must have known that I was ready. And that's another thing too. With my disability, he was like, I'm only going to put you in the ring with people who know what you can do and people who know what you can't do. And I appreciated them very much for that. And my parents were actually there. They actually came to both matches around that time. And my parents usually don't come to shows. Typically, they're the ones driving me to the show. Like, my dad one time took me to my second show ever in the business, NRW Fallout, at the River Valley High School in Correctionville, Iowa, for the final iteration of what was then the OWA. And that was the second show I ever ring announced, and they've been so supportive because it's a tremendous outlet for me. And my parents got there, Nate met them at the door, saw the look on my mom's face, and he went, I'll take care of him. Don't worry, I'll take care of him. And that's exactly what happened, and we came out on top. And almost like a serendipitous moment, I busted out 2 moves from wrestlers that I looked up to without really knowing it. A DDT, and I was a big Jake the Snake Roberts fan.
Nice.
Even though when I was introduced to wrestling, it was 93. I didn't see the Jake the Snake Roberts of the 80s or the Ultimate Warrior from the 80s. I was introduced in the second or third runs of those superstars. I gave Sean a DDT and I won with an acid drop. And I was very inspired by Spike Dudley and 1, 2, 3 Kid. And I looked at them and I was like, these guys are kind of my size, but they're doing it. And you don't have to be 6'7" and 300 pounds of muscles upon muscles to get a crowd going and be an inspiration to them and make the people feel something and be successful. Whereas Spike Dudley and 1, 2, 3 Kid, they started very young and had multiple runs across multiple different promotions.
For sure.
And just the ovation when I got the victory, and I got on the mic, I thanked my parents. They all cheered for my parents, which was nice. It was about 200 people in that little Eagles club.
That's so cool.
Sean came out afterwards and challenged me to a rematch that July, Hair versus Career.
Whoa.
And that was the match where I was really tested. I had no idea I could scream falsetto because a lot of those moves, like, they really, like, he got me in a backbreaker and he was stepping on my back and it was like an accordion. I was like, and the whole time I was like, I gotta finish no matter how much this hurts right now. And Sean gave me a scoop slam and he even gave me a muscle buster, which wasn't like how Samoa Joe does it. He went back on it. Ooh. And after the scoop slam, all the wind was knocked out of me, and the ref immediately came over and was like, are you okay? And I was like, like, I could barely get the words out. And with a little help from what was then Guns and Beer at the time, I beat Sean, and we shaved his hair, and it was, again, a tremendous ovation. And I like the fact that my last 3 matches have been in front of about the same amount of people, because my last match was at the Side Room, teaming with Sean against Joe DeSanti and Ryan McGregor at Magnum Pro Fight to Survive. And with my short-term memory issues and all that, dates and birthdays, like, I have trouble with that. So I want to say that was April of 2015, 2016-ish, if I can remember correctly. And because of Strife, I got to realize my dream of becoming a professional wrestler, even though I still remember 8 or 9 or 10-year-old me watching WWF Monday Night Raw and literally getting up and walking around the room playing the invisible manager and just picturing myself in that position, but kind of knowing in the back of my mind that maybe an in-ring career wasn't in the cards due to my disability. But I'm forever grateful to him giving me that chance and allowing me to live my dream even if I knew it wasn't going to last as far as in-ring went.
I mean, you're miles ahead of most people. I feel like a lot of people don't understand how prevalent wrestling is in Omaha in general, right? The fact that we even have schools like Bulletproof Academy or any other schools that maybe we're not aware of that can teach you to wrestle, to have this dream, to complete the dream. I mean, it's an awesome opportunity. We recommend you go check it out. I mean, if that's something you want to do, it's definitely something you should.
And 3 words that ring true for any kind of vocation with that: serious inquiries only. Because I've been participating in training seminars and training camps before, like the PWP shows in the mid-2000s. And I've seen many come and go, most go. And it's mostly kind of a wash because you see it on TV and there's the people who think they can do it, the people who are capable of doing it, and the people who can actually do it. And there's a very important distinction and delineation that happens there. I think there was even a quote from the first episode of WWE Breaking Ground where Matt Bloom said pretty much the exact same thing. 1 million people think they can do it, a select number have the capability to do it, and very few actually make it. And I've done WWE talent evaluation like in 2014 in Waterloo in front of Jim Ross and Gerald Briscoe.
Wow.
And we did like evaluation matches, and at the end of it in the convention center there was this huge conference room which reminded me of the football team right after a game. They stood at the front. Danny Hodge was off to the side, and I had vaguely heard of his exploits in amateur wrestling and professional wrestling, mostly that he could crush apples with his bare hands.
Wow.
And just being in that environment and getting a chance to perform in front of them, even though I was evaluated as a ref. They weren't accepting ring announcer evaluations at that time. But Jim Ross told us 99% of you are not going to make it. That's not me being disrespectful. That's not me being mean. That's me being real. And that's pretty much what the statistics were about at that time. And I'm excited to go to Waterloo again this year and see a lot of the same people that I saw when I did the evaluation in 2014. And wrestling training is very unique. It's unlike anything else. You know, I was too young to try out for the first Tough Enough and only saw the glimpse of inside wrestling schools through like TLC and ESPN documentaries around the 90s and stuff like that. It's very, very tough. And at the beginning of that class at the Magna Pro Dojo, Strife said, I'm going to push you guys very hard, because he trained with the OWA all the way back in 2000 and 2001. And you see some independent wrestlers start to claim different people as their trainers over time. He learned the most from Hype Gotti and Jaden Drago. His training in the OWA, he necessarily didn't, not to be disrespectful, but he didn't consider that as his true breakout starting as a professional wrestler. He did train with Donnie Peppercricket like in the very early 2000s. Like I guess they had some outdoor training that they did, and that was it was a pretty big class. And like he taught us as much in ring as he did out of the ring in terms of traveling with him and going up and down the road together and trying to teach proper etiquette and professionalism and knowing how to talk to promoters, knowing how to introduce yourself, shaking everybody's hand, saying hello to everybody, and that was just as important as what he taught us in ring.
Of course. I feel horrible myself just for the fact that I didn't get to meet Strife. I mean, I've seen him one time in the ring, and again, it was at that October show right before, the pause and then the revamp of Magnum. But
right.
I mean, his persona and just, I mean, the crowd that day, I mean, there was nothing. You could cut the tension with a knife. Like he captures the moment anytime that he has a mic or just in the ring in general. I mean, I noticed that immediately about him. Like there was just something special, just incredibly special about the way he talked, the way he elaborated. I mean, it was super sad for me too. And I've only seen him once in my entire life. You know what I mean? And just that moment for me and just the everlasting thing that he left me with incredible. So I wanted to piggyback that too. I found this picture. It looks like it was from a seminar with Adam Pearce. That's the NWA title.
Yep.
I mean, how was that moment for you? I'm sure that was incredibly cool.
It was the weekend of Magnum Pro Anniversary Volume 1. February 2012, somewhere around there. And Adam Pearce was coming in to defend the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Tony Cortez.
Wow.
And I was still training at the time and decided to do his seminar. And vaguely had heard of Pearce and like ROH when he feuded with Colt Cabana and Delirious, and knew that he was a Midwest indie worker, mostly in the NWA territory and all that. And I did the seminar, and I don't know how it was possible for me to earn someone's respect in an entire weekend, but it happened. And I like cut promos on everybody in the room, and he let me hold the historical 10 pounds of gold for one of those. And
wow.
That was another instance where Nate pulled me aside and he saw the work that I did in the seminar, which was a little bit in ring, but mostly character development. He pulled me aside and told me he was proud of me, which, and I almost don't want to use the term bullying because, well, if you go back and you look at the career of Howard Finkel, or you read Justin Roberts' book, or you go on a Patreon that I'm subscribed to that has all dark matches and pre-shows and full like rare shows where they just are just dogging Chimel left and right. Like, there's bullying and there's ribbing. I was a victim of ribbing, but it was all in good fun. And I remember becoming friends with the guys who ran PWP in 2005, and I would help out at their, I would help set up and tear down, and I was a regular fan in the front row at their shows. And we would go up and down the road, road trips, and I'd get ribbed a lot. And I remember a guy named BJ, who was part of the group, he was like, the day we don't pick on you, be worried. And we do it because we love you. And there was never a rib that went over the line, but like, just to be in that environment with Adam Pearce and to introduce myself and tell him my story, and even Missouri Wrestling Revival did a whole write-up on it at the time, and because that weekend for him was Friday at 3XW in Des Moines and Saturday at Magnum.
Wow.
And after that he was off to Cornelia, Georgia for, I guess, NWA. And before coming to Council Bluffs, he had wrestled for WXW in Germany. And that was a moment where I was like, and there's part of me, like, with my anxiety that I've struggled with, and that kind of, the misconception in my own mind is, he probably meets one of me everywhere he goes. But he told Nate privately, he was like, I've never experienced anything like Pete.
Wow.
And I was like, all right, I am in this little area that no one really knows about, and Midwest wrestling doesn't get as much traction as it does elsewhere, but I've made an impression on someone.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, after he got signed by WWE, he did a Facebook video Q&A, and I was one of the questions he picked, and he still remembered me. And
wow,
that's one person that I'll always be grateful for, him giving me the time and letting me take the ball and run with it, even if he knew that this is guy that, and I did a practice match, I think it was with Brian Gott at the time, and during the seminar, I don't know if we can cuss, but
go for it. We're okay.
And at the end of the match, I was huffing and puffing, and he gets everybody together, and he was like, he's entertaining. That's just a gift. You can't teach that. And he looked at me, he was like, Pete, you may never be in the main event of WrestleMania, but you're entertaining the shit out of me. God bless you. And everybody clapped. And
wow, that gave me chills.
yeah, and at the end of the weekend, we were at Scores in Ralston, which is where we would go for the after parties at Magnum. And he pulled me aside, and he was like, if I never see you again, if I die in a plane crash, What comes from your heart and your fucking brain is gold. Use it. Never let it go. God bless you. And he hugged me. And I was like, Like, that was kind of the resurgence I needed at that time, because I get picked on a lot and ribbed a lot, and it might go back to the old school mentality of how protective the business was at that time, and pick on the ones who don't belong and get them to quit. But I never did, even though I thought about it a few times. But it's just in my blood. I can't get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an amazing weekend, and it showed me that I need to stick with this and go for bigger and better challenges, and just keep going and keep being involved with it. And I know that one day it'll pay off in its own way.
Of course.
Whether that's a contract, whether that's extra work, which I would love. I'd probably be the most uncoordinated security guard you ever saw. But to me, it would be like career fulfillment. Not like a disrespect to where, oh, I got my moment, I'm done, because that's not my plan. But like, and this is only tangentially related, but I'm reminded of a High Spots interview with a women's wrestler by the name of Lufisto, where she said, I just want to know what it's like. I have this spark of hope where if I get a dark match, or if I get some sort of sense over what that environment is like, that's my main accomplishment. Because she overcame a lot of injuries and a lot of health issues at the time, and still is fighting those issues in her career and having to take a hiatus from wrestling. But I resonated with that interview a lot, because I just want to know what it's like. Part of me is skeptical whether or not I'd be able to live that life full time, because sometimes I stay up late on the weekends, and like, I get into bed and I think to myself, I'm at home in my own bed. A lot of them are probably just now getting on a flight, or just now going to the next town after doing like 4 or 5 days on the road, and they're only home for 2. So that's a big sacrifice you have to make to sort of live that dream. But it's definitely something I still want to pursue, and something definitely on my wrestling bucket list. And that seminar, and knowing that I could make an impression on someone like that, and also the bonkers statistic that the first 2 men to defend the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in Magnum are GMs on WWE right now, that's astounding.
I mean, that's a huge accomplishment in general. I mean, the fact that, how do you determine it's a coincidence? You know what I mean? Like, it almost feels like things like that are destined to be. So,
yep.
Super cool. Mm-hmm. I know we've bounced around a lot, but I kind of want to go back to like Magnum's origins, right? Like when it started. Not necessarily, you don't have to go crazy deep into it, but I'd like to pick your brain a little bit on that too, just to see kind of how. My understanding is Strife started. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then it was in Council Bluffs at the Eagles. That was kind of their main, where it started necessarily, or where did they hold shows? I guess give us a little bit more insight on that for me.
There's always been a point of contention in terms of wrestling in this area, because, and this is only a jumping off point to your question, but before the OWA started in 2000, 2001, all we got was WWF and WCW maybe once a year. I wasn't around, obviously, for the AWA days in the 70s and all that. And then didn't really have a lot of experience in indie wrestling either in Omaha. Like, from maybe 98 to 2001, maybe 2005, there were indie spot shows either promoted or financed by a former Omaha councilman by the name of Subby Anzaldo, but he ran what is now Harrah's when it was Harvey's, and those are my first 3 indie shows from like 99 to 01, and there was like Honky Tonk Man, the Bushwhackers, Doink, even though it was obviously a fake one, and I knew that, even in my fandom at that time.
You phony.
Right. And those shows drew very well. And that was my first experience with indie wrestling. And I had never been standing by the entryway and had wrestlers high five on the way to the ring, and what clicked was how personable the wrestlers could be in an independent wrestling setting versus a WWF show or a WCW show. So the OWA started in about 2000, 2001. I vividly remember doing homework in my room around that time. I was listening to our local K-Rock affiliate 93.3, and there was the stereotypical car salesman voiceover. The Omaha Wrestling Association Training School. Sign up now, and we accept girls if you think she's hot enough. Giving this phone number or whatever. And I think their first location was on Bondison Street in North Omaha in Mick Doyle's gym. But I didn't even know we had indie wrestling at that point. So I jumped on it. I went to the school. I met all the guys, and they asked if I wanted to get into the ring, and I politely declined. But just seeing a ring that I could get in, and seeing an old box TV in the corner where they watched the first OWA TV pilot on what was then Cox Metro 23, and them popping like, oh, remember this move? Oh, there goes your neck, and and at that time it was still regulated by the commission, so you didn't really know. The internet was kind of in its infancy, so websites like, this is how old I am, to see wrestlers' pictures and to see like what we now know as GIFs and videos, you had to go to somebody's GeoCities or Angel Fire page, and there had to be a multimedia section. And like my exposure through like Japanese hardcore wrestling was through AVI video clips on my Windows 95 computer in 1995. But after the OWA closed in 2004, PWP started up in 2005, and Strife was a part of the brainchild of that in terms of creative for it, and he also wrestled for the promotion. There was a falling out in PWP management and Strife, and I guess in his mind, and I don't know the whole story, but maybe in his mind, he knew he had to reach for something greater, or he saw a greater vision for the wrestling scene in Omaha, and in 2008 he started Magnum Pro, and our first show was at the Rec Center in Glenwood, Iowa. I think it was called Welcome to Zanzibar Land, and that was another thing about Nate. Like, he used a lot of obscure movie and video game references in his show names, much like Chikara used comic book references in their show names.
Gotcha.
It was especially noteworthy because it was a benefit show for our photographer's daughter, who had sustained a very serious injury in an automobile accident, was actually wheelchair bound from it.
Wow.
And Nate was good friends with her family, and good friends with our photographer, who ran a tumbling gym in Glenwood, and had a very good relationship with the family, and that was to help raise funds for medical expenses. It was about 80 people. I was still a spectator, and I was brought on for the second show as a ring announcer, but that was kind of the origins. And then we moved on to the Armory in Council Bluffs, and then the Eagles Club, 2009, 2010, 2012. We kind of hit our stride going from venue to venue, and that was basically the early beginnings of Magnum.
Wow. I mean, I find it fascinating, too, because I feel like wrestling as a whole is ages old. I'd say almost close to a century old at this point, right? And then I guess what bothers me about that is like every time we hear it, there's wrestling in Omaha. Like, we hear it so often. I mean, I hear Magnum say it a lot, and PWP says a lot, and it's just like, there is local wrestling here. Like, you can find it anywhere, and that's what we always try to do. I mean, that's our message from starting this, is to support your locals, to go out and find these people, enjoy it. I mean, a lot of these places, you can't even buy a meal for what you can watch 2 hours of wrestling for.
Well, with inflation.
At this point, right? At this point. But, I mean, that's the whole message we try to introduce, is to go out, support these guys. Because, I mean, if you love it, why not find somebody local to do it, to support it, for sure. Yep. I guess one thing I kind of wanted to touch on here, how different was the wrestling scene then compared to now? I mean, I'm sure it's bounds and leaps, but being so niche at the time versus to kind of how big it's gotten today. I'm sure there's a huge difference between how that was.
And are you asking about the OWA beginnings in the early 2000s or Magnum in 2008?
I'm going to say Magnum specifically, just because that's where we have the most importance too. Now, if you'd like to go back further, you're more than welcome.
Sure. Like I said, I had no idea that independent wrestling was even a thing in Omaha until I heard that commercial and discovered the OWA at that time. And then also, I think it had a lot to do with, and even though you guys are relatively new to Magnum, I would highly recommend early to mid to late 90s indie wrestling. Like the MTV True Life I'm a Pro Wrestler documentary. For some reason, the indies were white hot in the 90s in terms of how they drew different names that you heard all over, like Christopher Daniel, Shark Boy, Low Key, Amazing Red, The Hit Squad, Homicide, and those are mostly East Coast names, and I've always felt a connection to the East Coast scene, even though I'm from Omaha, but still feel a connection to that scene and followed promotions in that area. And with the oversight of the Athletic Commission and the deregulation of it from the Athletic Commission has allowed a lot of promotions to spread their wings and to grow the scene in the area. It's very interesting to go back through your old tapes and old DVDs of indie wrestling from that time period, not just from here, but from anywhere. And it's a good social experiment as far as what people cheered, what they booed, the kinds of wrestlers they liked to see, the kinds of matches that were prevalent at that time. I would say it was very kind of, because you had PWP, you had Magnum, and you had MWA also. There wasn't a whole lot of, it wasn't as robust as it is now. So I would say that the promoters at the time were still trying to find their footing, still trying to find what worked. And at the time, the Athletic Commission had a penchant for boxing and MMA. As far as wrestling, there wasn't all that much, and even if there was, you needed an EMT on site. You needed so much in an insurance bond. You needed a law enforcement officer at ringside.
Wow.
Everybody had to have a physical. And even now, with Oklahoma's commission getting ready or hopefully repealing their rules when it comes to intergender and transgender performers, them trying to take legal action against AEW because Nyla Rose is on the card, and for some reason they have backwards thinking to where, what is this person doing wrestling another person? If and we could go down a whole slippery slope with that. But and commissions are there, it's a mixed bag in terms, I would say there's maybe one or two states where the commission's actually for the wrestling business. Others are just trying to collect whatever percentage they can get from the gate, or put on events to draw people into the area, but they're not the biggest fans of it. So with the deregulation from the Athletic Commission and with the boom period of indie wrestling in the area, it attracted a lot of other performers from a lot of other parts of the country to come to our promotions and strengthen the scene. So it's definitely changed for the better.
I agree.
Now compared to almost 24 years ago now.
That's crazy to say, too, if you think about it. I mean, 24 years is a long time in, I guess, on a microscope, right? But in relativity to how long wrestling's been alive, it's very new still, if you think about it. I guess I wanted to go through and maybe see some memorable matches that maybe you enjoyed personally or maybe more sentimental to you and Magnum. I'd like to see maybe some familiar faces that maybe are now at the top of wrestling that you've had and had the experience to see. Just wanted to kind of pick your brain with that too.
It's a weird thing being on the show as a ring announcer, timekeeper, or what have you, because you want to express yourself as a fan, but you have a job to do.
Yeah.
And a lot of times there have been matches, especially in the Eagles Club and Side Room years, where I've been able to step out of that and become a fan again and enjoy it as a fan. Like I said, with my short-term memory, dates and specific details are difficult, but I think it was Devin Thomas against Justin Dier at the side room, and they just went back and forth, and it was a banger. The first Piggy in the Bank ladder match at the Firefighters Hall, I think it was the show with AJ Styles on it,
Wow.
where the fans were just into it, and that's another beautiful thing about wrestling too. I want to say there was 565 people there that night,
Wow.
and maybe a lot of them, like you said, had no idea there was wrestling here, and now have just been introduced to this whole new crop of talent, and probably came there for AJ, but the minute they walked in, they were like, oh, there's actually decent wrestlers. You know, I'm emotionally invested in this, and they got introduced to a whole new promotion that maybe they were just there to see the name who's been on TV before, but now are completely new fans of this promotion. A lot of matches stand out, especially from like the Top Gun division and things like that. And going back and reviewing all this footage, like the first 2 or 3 Battle Royale Cups from 2012 when Zack Sabre Jr. won it, 2013 when Gunnar Franks won it, becoming the first ever undisputed Magnum Pro Championship, because I think at that time we couldn't afford a trophy. The 2012 we had a trophy, and it was very windy that day, and it blew over and almost broke in half.
Oh, man.
And I think Zack Sabre Jr. left it in his hotel room. But it's also an interesting kind of case study to watch that old footage and be like, you know, there's 30 people in there. Why is Akira Tozawa wrestling Zack Sabre Jr. for the first time on American soil in front of 30 people? And you watch one of our shows now in front of 200, 300, 400 and seeing how much it's grown. That's also interesting to look back on too. And like, especially like Midwest indie workers from all over the area, like Eric Cannon, Darren Corbin, Carlito, Tozawa, Zack Sabre, Mark Andrews, and Pete Dunne from the third Battle Royal Cup, which I hope we can find the footage, because I've been told it was lost, but hopefully by hook or by crook I get to see some of that footage, because all I've seen is the flyer and the Defend Indie Wrestling Tour t-shirt from their tour, because
Wow.
Mark Andrews and Pete Dunne went all over America from England, I guess for a month or two, and one of their stops is at Magnum. Mark Andrews wrestled Strife, Pete Dunne wrestled Superfly in the tournament.
Wow.
Just little moments like that where it's almost like you see all these independent promotions, and now you have something in your area that's getting to be in the same echelon as those promotions, and you almost want the whole world to know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to happen overnight, but I'm sure it will, to where everybody from all over the country and all over the world is going to say, I've seen Magnum, I've seen what they can do, I want to go there, and I want to show them what I can do, and grow the scene even much more from there.
That's so cool. I mean, the first time we went, we were immediately hooked. I think the timing for us was unfortunate, right? Again, for being the first show that I went to, you guys had a little bit more experience than I did, the rest of the marks. But from immediate, I was dreading that show. I couldn't tell you the name of it. I'm not very good with it. I just remember.
People are strange.
Is that what the name of the show was?
Yeah.
Okay. So that show, we went through. I was super nervous to go because there was an announced death match. I'm very squeamish when it comes to certain things like that. I fought tooth and nail not to go, but I ended up making it. And from then on, I was hooked. I was like, I need to go to the next show. Unfortunately, there wasn't a next show for a little bit due to situations and what happened. But that March the March show, the weekend at Strife at the Firemen's Union, the revamp, the comeback show. I have never felt a building, let alone a room or a space, with that type of emotion, that type of sentiment. I mean, I think that show put it in perspective for me of like why I want to be connected to something like this. I want to support something like this just because I see how maybe it wasn't just Strife, but that one person could bring all of these people together and put on something so awesome that maybe anywhere in the world you might not get the same. You know what I mean? So that show for me made it incredibly special. It made me understand, like, hey, I want to be a part of this. We have to find a way to not necessarily work our way in, but to work with them somehow, some way. And luckily, we've been able to get to this point where we have a good rapport with everyone, and it's just been incredibly special that, in 2008 when it started, this one person built all the way up to where somehow we came along. You know what I mean? It's just incredibly special to us. So I want to make sure that is known. Magnum in general has been an amazing place for us. Every single show that we've been to, there's never been a bad show, let alone a bad match for us. I mean, I feel like every single match is just boom, 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 and it never comes down. It's always been, they set the bar just that much higher each time. So the fact that we can even be in attendance and be a part of it is just incredibly special. I just want to make sure that I say that as many times as I can. I guess the easy cop out right now, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about current day Magnum. How do you feel about the Apex and kind of the tear that they're on right now and kind of laying waste to whoever steps in front of them?
I'm having flashbacks to being pinned up against lockers in high school. Like,
Yep.
It's almost like you're racking your brain. It was like, who can stop these guys? Who can measure up to what they're capable of? And they've earned their reputation.
Easily.
They might as well, contract with a wheelbarrow company and have their own Apex wheelbarrow to carry all those belts around. As performers, I don't think it's a coincidence that they were part of the last class that Strife taught, and all three of them were the only three left. And Strife was able to give them that individualized attention and allow them to graduate and move on. I don't remember how many people started in that class, but they were the only three left. And just like Mike Bennett said at the show at German American Society, he looked up to the heavens where Strife is and was like, it's well taken care of. And that goes back to what I was saying about Pierce. For somebody who's been on TV and been all over the world to give Magnum their seal of approval and to enjoy coming here to our small little scene and not act like a weekend in Omaha is beneath them, because 99% of our interactions with big name talent have been positive. There was one situation back in 2013, which it's all out there as far as what happened, and for the benefit of expediency, I won't expand on it. It's out there if you want to read about it. 2 out of the 3 people are no longer involved in wrestling, and yes, the footage is out there, but we try to focus on the positives. We rose above the events of that weekend, and we made sure that what happened never did happen again. And we've had nothing but positive experiences from big name talent. And it's something else when a big name talent comes into a local promotion and, like I said, doesn't act like it's beneath them. Like, I remember seeing the look on EC3's face when he walked into the building for Over the Top 2023. It was almost like he was mesmerized. He was like, these guys got their shit together. Nice looking ring, sold out. And, in the pre-show meeting, he was like, the hardest thing you can do in this business is draw. And you guys were able to pack this place out. And he gave us a round of applause for that. And this is a guy who's been everywhere, who's done everything. And to get that seal of approval from big name talent like that over and over, it seems like, shows us that we're doing something right. And shows us that we are contributing positively to the local wrestling scene.
Definitely. I think that's what drew us the most to it, right? I mean, the fact that we are all wrestling fans, we grew up watching wrestling, at least some of us, I'd say. There's one of us that didn't know anything, but he's the half mark, and that's where that comes from.
Oh, I was wondering about that. I was like, who's the 0.5?
Yeah, so we have a half mark. His name is Bonda, the HCB. He knows nothing about wrestling, but he was kind of our the person that lit the fire under us to start a podcast. I mean, we always talked about wrestling in general behind closed doors, and it was just a relevant topic. But he's like, the way that you guys speak about wrestling and the way that you guys understand it, he's like, you have such a passion for it, so why not just put a mic in front of you and talk about it? Like, record it, see what happens, go from there, and eventually we've climbed to where we're at now. I mean, we're nothing special, to be honest with you, but the fact that we keep trying, I feel like that's where the resiliency and where I guess the proof is in the pudding in type sense. But yeah, that is where that comes from. Man, I mean, you've given us so much today, Pete. I just want to say thank you again. I have a fun little thing that I do with everybody that comes on this podcast, but I like to ask you, what is your Mount Rushmore of wrestling?
Oh, that stuff.
It's the hardest thing, and everyone's like, man, what do you like? How do you I just want your Rushmore, 4 people, 4 guys, whoever you choose. It's so hard, I know.
Yeah.
Take your time.
Yeah. 2 people right off the bat. The first person would have to be The Undertaker, because here's a guy that for over 25 years has constantly reinventing himself. No one Undertaker character story arc is ever the same. The introduction of Kane and the Ministry of Darkness was just phenomenal storytelling.
Some of my favorite.
In an era where my parents did anything but love the WWF Attitude Era at the time, because there was a documentary on ESPN called Outside the Lines, Pro Wrestling's Hold on America. And they watched it with me, and it was kind of a hit piece. Like, the mother's going, oh, I can't control what my kid does on the playground if he breaks somebody's neck. And like the Attitude Era at the time, and Vince being accosted for having a wrestler pimp, and having a 9-year-old kid describe in his own words the Mark Henry Chyna Sammy angle, which was hilarious to hear him describe it. But that was around the time where the Parents Television Council was leaning on them. That was the impetus for Right to Censor. Al Snow's action figure got banned from Walmart because the mannequin head was thought of as advocating domestic violence. And it was a women's rights group that didn't watch the product, didn't know who Al Snow was. And Al Snow famously said in an interview a couple of years ago, you can go to Walmart and buy an AR-15 live ammunition, but my action figure is still on that list of banned items. And
Wow.
Like, that was around the time where wrestling was in the mainstream, not always for a good reason.
Yeah.
But characters like that, like The Undertaker, I've been drawn to any wrestling character who's different, who's off the beaten path, who's supernatural, who's outside of the box, and always enjoyed every iteration of The Undertaker, all the way up until when I went to my first WrestleMania 32, and being in that sold-out stadium with technically 94,000 people, even though they said it was 101,000. But just seeing that Undertaker entrance for that Hell in the Cell and just taking it all in, like, I spent a lot of that show just taking it all in, like, I'm at WrestleMania right now. And just the entrance and the mystique, the fact that Paul Bearer actually was a licensed funeral director, like, just all these different elements of that character definitely puts Undertaker on the wrestling Mount Rushmore. I'd want to say CM Punk, because I vaguely heard of CM Punk in like 2001, around the time of the Ring of Honor first anniversary show, where they had a riot in the Queen's Elks Lodge, and saw CM Punk come out to try and quell the hostile crowd. And that's just been one guy that I've had a lot of respect for, not just because he's straight edge, because I myself am straight edge, not counting the 2 or 3 times Strife got me drunk at Magnum shows at Alchemy and Sokol, and made me do a bunch of Jello shots, and like didn't like the way it made me feel, but that was, part of the good-natured ribbing. So CM Punk's definitely up there. Shawn Michaels has definitely been a wrestler who's reinvented himself and had a tremendous run. And someone who I always associated mid to early 90s WWF with. He was always on the main event caliber matches. I would say number 3 would have to be William Regal, another one of those more than deserving Hall of Fame inductees down the line. Someone who I've always had a great deal of respect for, and someone who's got an eye for talent. There was a reason he was way up in the crow's nest at PWG watching Kevin Steen and El Generico and Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli, and lo and behold, they were signed maybe a year or two after that. He's got an eye for talent and one of the more underrated performers.
I agree.
As far as the last member of my wrestling Mount Rushmore, this is tough. It's a doozy of question you pose to your guests. They really have to use the old brain pan to think of 4 names.
It's hard too because it's ever changing, right?
Definitely. Let's see. Like, just off the top of my head, my 4th would have to be, in terms of a wrestling Mount Rushmore, just off the top of my head, in terms of the character and the longevity of their career, would be Jake the Snake Roberts. I was exposed to 1996 Jake Roberts. I saw like secondhand stuff from wrestling magazines from the 80s and 90s for Jake Roberts, but I was exposed during that 96 run. And I like it when I have a lot of full circle moments in wrestling and comedy and life in general. But to start doing comedy at an old bar called The Hideout on 72nd and doing the open mics and having the bar change ownership to the Lookout Lounge and have one of his first one-man shows be at the Lookout Lounge when Jake did the spoken word show. Like, that was a big full circle moment for me. And just the way that he would captivate your attention in his promos. Even though maybe behind the scenes he was performing in an altered state with the issues he's had with drug abuse and sobriety and things like that. But to see somebody come out of that, and like the resurrection of Jake the Snake documentary and DDP's assistance with him and several others in the wrestling business, and to see his redemption arc and to see him get inducted into the Hall of Fame, and then what he's done with AEW and the constant inspiration he is for wrestlers all over the world, and not just wrestlers but people in general through his story, I definitely would include him in my wrestling Mount Rushmore with those other names.
Man, I mean, you nailed 4 really good ones. Like, I bet you that resonates a lot to more people. Now, I'm gonna add the microscope to this just a little bit further. Let's do a Mount Rushmore, but for Magnum.
Okay.
A little bit, maybe easier, maybe harder. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think that would be proper too, just because of how much involvement you've had with Magnum.
Sure. Definitely in the middle of Mount Rushmore would be Jason Strife. Like, that is just a given, because I don't know if it was selfishness on his part in 2006 or 2007 to be like, wrestling's good in this area, it could be a whole lot better, and that's why I'm going to take a stab at it, and I'm going to try this Magnum thing. And he made no bones about the fact, like one of his famous quotes was, "The less I wrestle, the less I care." And I think he parlayed that into the less shows I promote, and if wrestling's on a downswing, maybe my motivation isn't the best to promote or to put forth my best effort in, and like, it was some kind of a love-hate relationship with wrestling. He wanted to go to stunt school. That was his big thing, to be a professional stuntman. And he just sort of fell into wrestling and had an obsession and a passion for it, and trained and worked and busted his ass for years to get to where he got as a performer. And then as a promoter, he was one of the few in the area, and anyone who I've met since, who actually treated it like a business and was always thinking. Like, we'd be going up and down the road to different shows, and he'd be like, I could have wrestling here. And I'd be like, Nate, that's a come and go in Auburn, Nebraska. But he always had that promoter mindset. It was like, oh, maybe we should start running here. Like, we could put the ring there. I could put the chairs here. Or I could bring in this person. Or I have these connections here. And he always tried to make it better for everyone else, including him. And wrestling was just, in this area, was synonymous with him. He was synonymous with wrestling and with Magnum. And that's what we always try to do every time we go out there. And I haven't experienced a whole lot of loss in my life or a whole lot of experience with grief, but like, I walk into a building and I'm half expecting him to yell at me for something, or to be like, to joke with me, or like I'm still looking for him. And it's tough for a lot of us still, even though it's only been a year and a half. But he's definitely at the top of a Mount Rushmore of Magnum. The other three names, I would say. One would definitely be Red Wing. I got to know him in the Eagles Club days. He kind of came around and was like, kind of hadn't come out of his shell yet, and was still getting used to that environment and still getting used to being a wrestler, because he came from an athletic background, high school football, powerlifting, and was still trying to find his footing. And he's definitely been one of the workhorses in Magnum. Number 3 would have to be Devin Thomas, even though he sort of stepped away from wrestling and moved on to other priorities in his life. Like, Red Wing and Devin were always the two names that people brought up to be like, those two guys are good enough to be on TV right now. And when Red Wing did the Performance Center tryout that was featured on WWE's YouTube channel around the time, and like the comments with the timestamp of like seeing him do rolls, and one of the comments was like, who the fuck is this guy? Because you see him and you're just drawn to him. He's just built like a brick shithouse, and like has this tremendous look of, he's got to be somebody. Like Dusty Rhodes on an episode of the Legends of Wrestling Roundtable was talking about Ric Flair, and he said when he walked into a room, even if you didn't know who he was, you knew he was somebody. And that's how I see Red Wing in his various incarnations and the names that he's competed against, and the fact that, just like Strife, he wants to see wrestling prosper for everybody. And Devin had that mindset as well. Like, he was another one of the workhorses that went up against anybody and everybody. His match against Drew McIntyre, fresh off a WWE run,
wow.
Magnum gets its wings. That's another thing too. When people who have been on TV come to Magnum, you sort of become a fan of them if you weren't before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, before McIntyre came to Magnum or whatever, I didn't get the appeal, because I had only seen that run on SmackDown in 2017 and 2007, 2008, 2009, and 3MB and things like that. He came to Magnum and I was instantly hooked. I became a fan, and it's not often he is up partying with the crew until 5 in the morning. But he came in, he was enthusiastic, and he was just ready to go out there and give those people a show. And unbeknownst to me, the Evolve Heavyweight Championship was defended in a 3-way with, I believe it was McIntyre and Devin and Stevie Richards. And
What a shit! Whoa! What a match! Oh my goodness!
And
I
that,
heard about that.
Oh my goodness!
and that whole storyline of Stevie stealing the Magnum title just got so many more new eyes on the product. And like, this is kind of off topic a little bit,
It's perfectly fine.
but one day before we went in to start training, I was in Nate's living room, which he had the Rush Hour poster. He had the big ass Blu-ray collection that he was showing off in in his promo for a match with, I think it was Hype or Tony, but I was in the living room, we were hanging out, and he just all of a sudden said, "Pete, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but did you ever think in your wildest dreams you'd be involved with a wrestling promotion, doing shows after being a fan and ring announcing and going up and down the road with these guys and learning what it takes to make a good show?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. I wouldn't have believed you if you thought I'd actually be part of the wrestling business. Like, if you went to the Civic Auditorium on April 28th, 1996 at In Your House, Good Friends, Better Enemies, and walked up to that kid covering his ears because everything was so loud and told him one day you're going to work for a promotion, you're going to be in the wrestling business, you won't just be out there watching, buying a ticket, you're actually going to be involved in living your dream," you know, that kid would have been dumbfounded. He wouldn't have believed you. And if you also would have walked up to 16-year-old me, ring announcing the first annual Chip Douglas Memorial Show at Woodrow Wilson Junior High School in Council Bluffs, August 30th, 2003, and told him that you're going to get to wrestle, you're going to get to ring announce, you're going to get to referee, you're going to get to ring the bell, you're going to work for a promotion. Like, it's just been an incredible career, and I dare say I've got 21 more years left in me, and I just realized I have one more name left to go on the Magnum Rushmore. I'd want to say Tony Cortez, because, like, around the time of the OWA, like, I only went to one of their shows, and I wish I could have gone to a lot more and gotten to know the guys, but I eventually did get to know everybody through their exposure in PWP and Magnum. But Tony was always another one of those workhorses who held the Magnum title on more than one occasion, who had a great career, not just in Magnum, but in PWP and OWA, and is enjoying his retirement, still comes out to shows, and that's another thing too. The Nebraska Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame is really doing a good job bolstering the knowledge and the notoriety of wrestling in this area, past, present, and future. And their traveling display is actually going to be in Waterloo this year. And, you know, just like going back to what I was saying earlier about just the fact that there's wrestling in this area, period. Because there's been the politics and there's been the back and forth BS between the local promotions as far as who shows better or whose show they think is better or who utilizes talent better. And I'm one of those guys that just is in the back of the room raising my hand, and I'm going, can't we just be happy there's wrestling here? Can't we just be happy that there's a wrestling product for the fans to consume? And if you don't like one promotion, there's a bunch of other ones that you might be able to discover and be like, okay, I like that stuff. Or let me support all the different wrestling promotions in my area. Like, I look at wrestling as a whole because I was never able to work for PWP, even though I supported them from 2005 till Magnum started. And I did anything I could to support the local wrestling scene, no matter what promotion it was that I worked for. And I think that even after Strife's passing, and even after Magnum's kind of hiatus and restart, and another hiatus and another restart, like, wrestling has never been better in the area. And we need to do everything we can as fans, as ring announcers, as wrestlers, as staff, as production people, to nurture it and take care of it, because wrestling, I feel, is going to be around forever in some form or fashion. And Magnum is definitely one of those promotions that tells us that wrestling is going to be just fine in the area. But there's also any other kind of promotion you could think of in the Midwest, and all these other untapped, undiscovered areas of wrestling that are just waiting for that one podcast or that one group of fans or that one show that puts them on the map. And for Magnum, especially after the restart, I feel like we're just doing better and better every time, and Strife's got the best seat in the house, And I don't think he's up there going, I'm proud. He's up there going, I knew you could do it.
Yeah, like damn
even,
right.
Even without me, and it was a shock to all of us. He was like, I knew it could get to this point, and I knew that everybody would still want to stick around and help cultivate the area. And I think wrestling in this area is something very special, and I think it's about time the rest of the world knows, because Nate was told that Omaha is considered a flyover town for some of the big name promotions, or like there's a 2-hour attention black hole around the area where, compared to different parts of the country, they might not really know what we're doing. And even Nate one time was kind of frustrated one day. He was like, no one knows who we are and no one knows we're here. That's the big hurdle we sort of have to get over, but I feel like the world's starting to know about wrestling in this area, and it's a beautiful thing, and I hope it continues for years to come.
I agree with you fully. And I mean, like I said earlier, that's the message we try to provide. It's not just Omaha. It's not just Council Bluffs. I mean, it's anywhere that you're able to travel to, you should go find the wrestling there. And not necessarily the big name companies like AEW, WWE. I mean, even NWA to an extent, right? But I would say anything local that you've maybe never heard of or never seen these guys, go out, check them out. I mean, for what you can buy a ticket, you're not going to be disappointed. I guarantee that. I mean, any show that I've been to, and especially local to that area, I've not been disappointed. Like, everyone puts on their best, and I mean, I feel that in general. And again, touching back to what you said about the personality or the personable experiences that you get from sitting front row, where wrestlers interact with you, whether it be positive or negative. I mean, it's still a reaction nonetheless. And I think honestly, that's probably what drove us to it the most, was just the fact that these guys they make you feel just like us, but yet they're superhuman as soon as they cross those ropes.
Definitely.
So it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing, and I really appreciate that sentiment and how you elaborated on that. I think you did that quite well.
Like, there's no better drug than going out there in front of people and performing, or just going to a show. Like, I don't think any of us have any conception over what wrestling does for people, and how it brings people together, and how it gets them through tough times, and how, like, in some situations, especially if someone has a disability, physical, mental, social, psychological, what have you, if they can gravitate towards wrestling and use that to express themselves, or latch onto that and use that to enhance their lives and help them find a meaning or a purpose or an escapism, because it's all about 2 to 3 hours a night, once or twice a month. Nothing else matters. Even if I have to go back to my real job on Monday morning, or go back to real life the next morning, like, there's no better feeling and there's no better therapy. And it's just such a beautiful thing for the wrestlers, the fans, anybody who's involved with it. And same principle as when I do my comedy. Like, I mostly do it for me, but if I can't heal from my art, then how can you heal? If this doesn't help me, how is it going to help you? And I think we can all help each other and bring each other together through awesome things like wrestling. And that's one of the beautiful things about it that I hope never changes.
I couldn't have said that any better, Pete. Incredible. So thank you so much. If you don't mind, just tell us kind of where to find you, anything that maybe you have upcoming. Just kind of shout yourself out and what you have going on. So I'm sure anybody watching this would love to follow you too. So sure. I would appreciate if you told us kind of where to find you.
Sure, and you're probably going to have cool graphics or lower thirds.
We got you.
Yep.
We got you.
I am on Twitter at Pete Sanctions. That is my wrestling name. Funny story of how that all came about. It's a big long post on Facebook, but suffice it to say, I was on vacation in the New Jersey Shore and got the opportunity to ring announce a few matches for a local company in nearby Seaside Heights. And the promoter, I told him my real last name, and he was like, yeah, that's not going to work. We gotta think of something. And it took him 10 seconds, and he was like, Pete Sanctions. And I'm not going to lie, at first I hated it, but I was like, this is an opportunity. It's a new company. I got to make a good first impression. And it stuck, and it's worked. And that's where you can find me on Twitter, and also I have a Facebook fan page that I still need to update. It's another thing where my ADD mind is just all over the place, and I got to get down and get out of that executive function and actually build my brand. And I'm also at Facebook under my real name, Pete Sakaris Comedy. My last name is spelled Sakaris. And don't feel bad if you spell it wrong, because tons of people have over the years, and it's no problem, because it's Greek by origin, but I've seen it spelled wrong and tons of times. And even hosts, when they bring me up on stage, they've flubbed it, and they were like, how do you say your last name? And I'm like, just say the words pizza and carrots and put them together, and you're gonna be fine.
Wow.
As far as what I have coming up, I'm obviously going to be out of town for Hot Magnum Nights 2024, but I will be involved with Magnum going forward. I don't have an August date yet, but like us on Facebook at Magnum Wrestling through all our social media, and you'll definitely find out more information on that. As far as my stand-up, I will be part of the 2024 Omaha Comedy Festival in late September.
Cool.
Doing shows at the Sydney in Benson and the Backline in downtown Omaha, my home comedy venue.
The Backline?
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool.
The Backline Comedy Theater on 1618 Harney Street, and the Sydney as well in Benson. So the Omaha Comedy Fest is in mid-September, and in October I will be taking part in the Clash of the Comics at the Omaha Funny Bone that I've done maybe 5 or 6 times. The winner gets an opportunity to host for a nationally touring comedian, and has an opportunity to perform a guest spot. And that's sort of the mecca for local comedy. That's where everybody goes to get discovered, quote unquote, because like Mike Bennett told the students at his seminar, there's no one path to making it. Everybody's definition of making it and everybody's definition of reaching for that brass ring is totally different. And there are many ways, and there's no path. There's no one way to make it big and accomplishing your dreams. And you can find me on all those social media channels, and I promise I'll make sure to keep them as updated as I can. And mostly, my Twitter is just, retweets of cat videos, the occasional wrestling video here and there. And I'm nowhere near the influencer mindset. One of my favorite Aesop Rock lyrics is from an album he put out called Garbology. And it's, every time an influencer offers advice, I feel the years coming off of my life. Because you hear these people that go viral and have their 15 minutes of fame, but are they going to be around in 5 years? Is the news cycle going to sustain them for that long? There are comedians who are very good on stage, but very bad at marketing. And there are comedians who are very good at marketing, but not the best performers. Mm-hmm. Because I focus on being good. I don't focus on being famous. Because fame, it changes people.
I agree.
Because you see people like Matt Rife and people who are TikTok famous, but that only gets you so far.
I agree.
And as long as I'm out there having fun and doing what I can do and loving what I'm doing, whether it's wrestling or comedy, then I foresee a good future for myself in performing, and I'm not stopping anytime soon. And a lot of fans wonder, why I'm not up there ring announcing as much as I used to. Maybe it's time for me to keep performing, but also want to give back to the next generation of performers.
It's always a good time to evolve, right?
Definitely.
And I think just based on our conversation today, I can see that you're extremely multifaceted. Just the impression that you left on me today has been incredible. So thank you again, Pete. You are awesome. Okay. I'm going to teach you our sign out. It's from an old APA skit, right? Yeah. So back then, it was the Dudleys looking for protection. Mm-hmm. They went to the APA. The APA are playing cards.
Oh, was that when Bubba got the jackpot, and then they smashed the beer bottle over his head and a brawl broke out?
I think it was I think it was after that, because what they said, they were asking for the help, and they said, our sign out is if that check bounces, so do you. And
Oh,
Farouk says that.
Farouk says that.
Ron Simmons' episode of Broken Skull Sessions, where they threw to that,
Yeah.
and I had never seen that before, and I just died laughing.
Yeah.
Because with just one word, he doesn't even have to go in and like do a whole bunch. But yep, I remember those APA vignettes, and to mark out for a second, pun intended.
Go for it.
The draft and the breakup of the APA and the handshake and the dimming of the lights, where all you could see was that door and the sign above the door. That was like the end of their run, and they couldn't have done it any better. That, like, you want to talk about good eras in wrestling. Like the Ruthless Aggression era and the 2000s. Like, if I could bottle the crowd from the Raw where Shelton Benjamin upset Triple H, or like DDP was revealed as the Stalker, or Shawn Michaels super kicked Shelton Benjamin out of thin air during the Gold Rush tournament. There's a certain magnetism about early 2000s crowds that I can't put my finger on, but I wish you could bottle it and just inject that into every crowd since then, even though wrestling is hotter than it's ever been.
I agree. So with our sign off, we just say, if that check bounces, so do you. We found it. I don't even remember how. It was just super obscure.
So the Dudleys were asking for protection, and they were asking like payment. It was like, well, have you paid? It's like, well, do you guys take check? Ron Simmons like, check. He's like, well, he's like, yeah, you guys take check. He's like, yeah, but if that check bounces, so do you.
So we've just developed that as our outro and how we end off and sign off our videos. So I would appreciate if you did that for us. So again, Pete, thank you so much for coming on. You've been incredible. I mean, it's been honestly one of the coolest interviews we've ever done, just based on the history, learning about you, learning about Magnum. I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better person to sit here today. So thank you again. But I don't even know where to go with this. I'll hand it over to you, and you let them know.
Thanks for having me, guys. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And if that check bounces, so do you.
Goodbye.